It's the Smart Driving Cars podcast. Thank you for taking the time with us once again. This edition is sponsored by the Smart ETF's Smart Transportation and Technology ETF, symbol MOTO. For more information, head to motoetf.com. Technical support is provided by CARTS, the Corporation for Automated Road Transportation Safety, a 501c3 corporation. I'm Fred Fishkin, along with the Faculty Chair of Autonomous Vehicle Engineering at Princeton University, Alain Kornhauser. Hi, Alain.
Hey, good afternoon, Fred.
Good afternoon. And with us are Marc Scribner, Senior Transportation Policy Analyst at Reason Foundation. Hi, Marc.
Hi, thanks for having me back.
And also with us is Cliff Winston, Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution. We're happy to see you as well, Cliff.
Greetings, good to be back.
Well, it looks like we have a great discussion ahead, Alain, on the current state and the outlook for autonomous vehicles. A recent opinion piece in the Washington Post by David Zipper, a visiting fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School, was headlined, "Companies are racing to make self-driving cars, but why? They may not be safer than human drivers, and they'll make gridlock worse." He starts out by talking about Ford's plans announced in 2016 to offer self-driving taxis by 2021 and Lyft's plans to do it even earlier. And he says such unfulfilled promises now lie in the rearview mirror. Alain, maybe you want to get this started and bring in our guests here.
Well, yes, I think those are facts. I think, yes, they're facts. But my goodness, maybe we can go all the way back to 1939 and, with the World's Fair when General Motors was out there talking to us about automated highways and some of these 1956 style videos where you have, the Putin of the time directing traffic from up on high. Excuse me for the comment of a current individual today. But anyway, maybe we maybe haven't come quite as far as maybe we thought, or some of us thought we would be. But I think some of the other issues that are being brought out here are just not even completely on the mark. I think at least many of us know why we're doing this. And but anyway, let's hear from Marc and let's hear from Cliff.
Let me do a full disclosure here. David Zipper was a research assistant of mine at Brookings. He's a good guy. Had a good background in economics from Swarthmore. We worked on various projects, and he was very helpful. Went on for a Harvard MBA. Wasn't quite clear, to me at least, where he was going, and I think he sort of found himself more as a journalist than an economic analyst. I think my concern now with the things he's been writing is given his constituency, I think his interest is more as an urbanist and supporting those kinds of perspectives that are generally anti-car and supportive of transit and walking and non-fuel related vehicles. But I think he's also let go his connection with economics. And I think as a general point, which I actually made yesterday, the timing of this podcast is interesting. There was an American Economic Association podcast with transportation and public utility economists actually talking about the Biden infrastructure bill. But one of the major points that I made to them is we really need more economists in the public debate about autonomous vehicles. I'm concerned too much of the debate and what people hear about is coming from either planners or urbanists or engineers/technologists. And I think they are just fundamentally overlooking a lot of just basic economic principles that I think are critical in understanding a variety relevant issues. Let me just briefly summarize them as a preview, at least what I'll try to weave in the discussion. The first is just the idea in trying to do analytical work of what we call selection bias, and the importance of truly working with a random sample, but how easy it is can be fooled and thinking you have a random sample when you really have what is known as selectivity bias. And that's particularly relevant to safety concerns. The second thing, again, which non-economists often have a hard time doing, is really respecting people's preferences. You may not like them, you may disagree with them, but you have to count them, especially if you're thinking about policy. And too often, again, I think people, again, who are not particularly not economists, overlook that people's preferences count. This is it. They've decided this is what they want. And you can't say necessarily that they are bad people or they should be ignored for doing that. Now, what you can do, and this is the third point, is say, yes, but there are social costs associated with your preferences, and that is fine. But if you're then going to go ahead and start thinking about constructive policy, you have to balance then people's private preferences and the values they place on those versus social costs. And then the policies that we're trying to look for, trying to maximize the net effect of those things. Again, too often the preferences are ignored. And finally, the importance of really appreciating the intellectual work in economics on technological change. There's been extensive theory that's led to Nobel Prizes, and there's a very fascinating history of technological change, which really sheds light on the difficulty of making predictions, but certain things that one needs to bear in mind when one is making predictions about the future of a technology such as autonomous vehicles. So, those are the points that I want to at least try to weave in a bit in our discussion with David's article and a number of other exchanges I've had and you've had with people who are clearly naysayers on AV technology. So yeah, that's sort of where I am on this.
Mark?
Yeah, I think, Cliff raises great points. But, I think what permeated David's article that struck me as just as wrongheaded from right out the gate was the sort of this assumption that expectations were for AVs to be on the market and ubiquitous yesterday. And it's absolutely true. There was a lot of hype coming out of certain companies that was amplified by the press and certain politicians in the last 10 years. Absolutely true. But one thing, and I pointed this out in a response I wrote on reason.org, is that if you ask experts, Alain, the types who would go to the TRB Automated Vehicle Summit, now ARTS, if you ask them, they were putting the median deployment year for the kind of self-driving taxis that was largely the focus of the article in the Post was 2030. And that was from a survey of attendees in 2014, which was right around, I think, when the AV hype was at its worst. So you don't have to look far to find sort of more reasonable expectations about where we are in AV development, certainly AV deployment. And I think that if David had sought out, I guess, more of the views of people who had been involved in the development of these technologies and thinking about this, seriously, he wouldn't have come away with this, this picture of everyone was saying this was already going to happen. We've missed the deadline. This is a big, AVs are a big failure. So I think, that the kind of the pessimism that permeates the piece, I think could have been avoided if he perhaps sought out some different views.
I think the point you're getting at also just suggests the absence of reality checks. If you're really approaching this objectively, there are at least two, and I think you guys will probably think of more things you'd consider. first of all, the government is a huge player in this. You cannot just, introduce an AV to the market and try to sell it, let alone operate it. Everyone knows that. I mean, if you have any appreciation of how the automobile market works, anything that you want to do goes through DOT, NHTSA, and everyone. And I don't know, you might just have seen today about NHTSA, after nearly a decade, is allowing cars to have more flexible lighting beams. Did you see that?
Yeah.
The adaptive driving beam
Adaptive
lamps.
driving.
It was their delay for the last, it was Toyota that initially
Toyota
petitioned in
in-
2013.
Exactly.
And it's been a go-to example of mine of for the last decade of NHTSA, sitting on its hands. So I guess I'm going to have to find a new one now.
And what Japan and Europe have had those things for 2 decades, right? A decade. So obviously, you've got to be realistic and say, wait a minute, you have to account for something where government has a critical role, and they're basically going to tell you when these things are going to be out there. That has to be taken into account when anybody in the private sector says when these things are going to be available. But there's also a second thing. There is danger if what was claimed is true, that CEOs and industry people were making claims as to when these vehicles will be available, but they're basically breaking the law in terms of the SEC, because obviously these guys were using this to raise investors' money, right? They're the ones putting the money into this with expectations of when they're going to get a payoff on their investment. And if there really was this almost industry-wide false claim about when the technology was to appear, I would think we would hear lawsuits, serious lawsuits from investors that have said, wait a minute, you misled me in terms of when you said this thing would be available. You said this, and obviously there were years of delay, but we haven't heard anything like that. So I really don't think that there's been, quote, the hype that has been permeating every bit of AV development that has been claimed in the media. I just think the reality checks would argue against that.
Yeah, and to be clear, it's not every company has been writing checks they can't cash on the sort of the deployment of this. And if you look, I highly recommend a timeline that it's on the Center for Automotive Research's website by a former analyst there named Eric Paul Dennis, and Eric tracked these deployment promises over the years, and it's a neat little tool. But one thing you'll notice is that a lot of the missed deployment dates are from companies that no longer exist, and a lot of them were these were, I would say, minor players that were either swallowed up or they went out of business, and that's to be expected in this. I think the AV industry, and I know Alain has been following this since the beginning, is maturing. We're seeing fewer and fewer of these kind of Silicon Valley garage startups ever since we saw major buy-in from the conventional automakers. So we've professionalized the development over the years in a way that I think, as Cliff is saying, we've entered an era where those kinds of loose statements that may have been made by some companies in the past are less likely to occur now and in the future, because I think we've just got a higher caliber of developers that are still playing.
Well, I mean, if I can throw in just a little bit, to me, it really depends as to who's saying this. I mean, is it something that appears in a Sunday supplement of a whatever? I mean, the Sunday supplements, everybody knows that that's an entertainment section. That who knows? I mean, the stuff that's written there is again, for entertainment purposes. It isn't for serious business trying to really, or by people who are really trying to do things. And if you look at, and it's already been mentioned, at the reality of introducing any new technology, whether it's a cell phone, even if it's the Apple Watch, electric vehicles. I mean, take any of them. It's been, it all these things, when people talk about deployment, meaning that in fact it's not testing, it's not out there trying to figure out what's going on, but it's actually delivering the value of the product that you're putting out there by consumers who are reaching into their pockets every day, making the rational decision to actually do this versus do that, and so on. I mean, those are the things that one really those things just take an enormous amount of time.
Let me go back at least to the points on economics of David's article. He makes a point that autonomous vehicles will lead to congestion. At the same time, he also implies that they're probably not going to work. So obviously that doesn't seem to make sense, right? Why is it that you're going to have people in them that increase VMT when the thing doesn't work? So let's set aside the technology question, look at the economics. All right, first of all, again, that's in line with what I'm saying. You have to count that as a good thing. People have made their choice and using these more often to increase congestion. Now, there are social costs associated with that, but all of these people, because they have done that, believe they're better off by doing it. And you can't just say, I don't like it. That's necessarily a bad thing. It's something that you need to include in the calculation. And this then leads to the absurdity of some counterfactuals. He'll go along and say something about safety and say, if we assumed that people in cars use buses, look how many lives we would save, okay? Now, again, in terms of preferences, people have already said they want to be in cars, not buses. So we're not even controlling for the trips. We're not saying it's the exact same car trip where you're put on a bus. Bus trips are very different than car trips, okay? But even so, suppose you did make that switch. Look at the huge utility loss for everybody in cars that was forced to get on a bus, right? There'd be enormous loss. Now, admittedly, you could then say, yes, but we would save lives. Fine. But the way one does serious cost-benefit analysis, you have to account for the preferences. And people have preferred to go on cars, and you put them in buses, there are going to be huge utility losses and you will save lives. And we have implied values of life. But that's how you'd have to do the calculation initially. But then that's still not the point. If you're serious about trying to draw policy implications, then the question you ask is, what would be the most efficient way to net off these effects such that net benefits are positive? Well, obviously, we know in the case of congestion, put in congestion pricing. If you got a problem that there's too much VMT out there, then go ahead and slap on a congestion tax. That will discourage people and enable then those who truly are willing to pay the cost and the social cost of their driving and equate that with their utility of driving will be out there. Those who don't, won't. That's what you want to do. You can do a similar type of thing with any other externality. If you believe there's risk to driving, you can then add that to a per mile tax that accounts for the likelihood of accidents. That's how you do it. But you don't just sort of say these things are bad and therefore the technology is bad without realizing there are benefits. And then most importantly, not even moving forward with any sensible policy recommendations, which just have been absent in these entire criticisms.
In the classroom, unfortunately, with my students, I go even farther. I guess fundamentally, I argue that every individual is rational and behaves rationally. That a behavior is driven by an individual looking at the alternatives and picking from the top. Okay, period. I mean, what they do, randomly choose among the set of opportunities, pick the second, they pick the third, whatever, they pick from the top. Now, how something absolutely gets ranked to the top on an individual and so on, so they decide to do this, who knows? I mean, that involves whatever kind of, who knows what nonlinear did do, and what's taken into account. If in fact, out of that process, you happen to make an externality, be in my mind, hey, no problem here. There's no cost associated with that. How can you expect that externality to go in and say, oh man, that guy doesn't come in at the top, something else comes in at the top? How do you get anybody to ride a bus? If you do any mode split model almost on any trip, guess what you get? Bus is not the number one way to go. In fact, whatever. And if walking is good, people walk. All right. But if you're trying to go someplace where, hey, walking is hard and okay, the bus doesn't go there, how the hell you go? I mean, if you look at these things, and how do you force people on buses? And if it's going to be that people are choosing vehicles, and all of a sudden you make vehicles available because you make it affordable and available to people who couldn't afford the other ones, don't they deserve a little bit of the capacity, or are they supposed to stay home and just walk to everywhere? Come on. I don't understand any of this stuff. Help me out, guys.
Well, and I think that's a really important point here. Really from an equity standpoint, Alan, and I know you're very interested in that with the Trenton Moves project. But the big problem with in low income households in America is their lack of access to vehicles and
mobility of just mobility. I mean.
Exactly. And if you look at low income household VMT compared to middle income and high income, it's way below that. So, right. Like an equity focused policy would be trying to raise their average vehicle miles traveled.
Absolutely.
But the promise, and you see it, there was a passage in the article that talked about, well, why would we want self-driving cars in cities? We already have taxis and Uber and Lyft today. And it misses the, sort of the big point that that AVs could potentially see the cost of providing that service.
The affordability piece. The affordability piece.
So that, there's been some preliminary modeling, and, Alan, we've talked about how one of the funny things of this, the cost uncertainties, one of the big ones is cleaning costs for these types of shared taxis, how you do that in an affordable way to keep those average costs down. But, we've seen, initial attempts to sort of provide at least kind of guesstimates at this, and they're coming up with figures that put automated taxis passenger mile costs on par with conventional transit at high occupancies. So when transit figures look the best, so that is what we're talking about, providing this level of service to people who don't have access to cars. And it's not just the poor who can't afford cars. It's also those who have physical and cognitive disabilities that prevent them from driving. This, potential game changer for those folks, setting aside the benefits to people who can drive today. So I think that is missed, a big omission in this Washington Post piece.
I think also there's another reality check, again, which I think is generally going to be the theme of a lot of what I say, that I think though is consistent with what I think, again, is more of a polemical or ideological position, not just in this piece, but in many other pieces of this sort, and even on the technology side. And that is in the spirit of what Alan is saying. There is no evidence whatsoever that you make effective policy by assuming people are stupid. I'm not aware of any public policy that said, look, we're going to do this because we know people are stupid. And if we do this, this will get the desired outcome. Instead, what one has, if you have, again, an ideological point of view, is an outcome that you want, like no AVs or no cars, whatever, but without deducing it from, okay, what then is the policy going to be to get it, that accounts for rational behavior? And if you start doing that and you think through, wait a minute, rational behavior is not going to lead to this outcome, right? Rational behavior is going to lead probably to AVs. If they have superior attributes, people are going to use them. And we've seen that time and time again for intercity transportation, for freight transportation, for international transportation. Why would urban transportation be any different, right? And so again, I think it's the absence of reality checks that I think are indications of this polemical perspective on these issues.
Yeah, I mean, let me throw in also the reason why I have a tie on and so on today is I was down at Trenton High School this morning. If you're a 15-year-old, how do you get around? You have a choice of walking, waiting for the bus, who knows when that's coming and where that's going, or if your parents are rich enough, getting hauled. I mean, those are your options. You don't have the option of walking out, getting into something and taking you there. I mean, to me, the thing that's not taken into account with these driverless things, okay, when you have the best service at 2:00 in the morning. Why? Because these things are so lightly used. They're available all over the damn place, so that in case you have to go to get something at the pharmacy or go someplace or start your nighttime cleaning job at the who knows what, it's there. Hey, I'll take you. Oh my God, when's the bus going to do that? When is a bus going to give somebody the opportunity to make the rational decision to take a bus when it's not there? I mean, cut it out. And therefore, this person doesn't have the opportunity. And this happens all over the darn place. The beauty of this stuff that isn't is the level of service offered, in some sense, at a drop of a hat for somebody who desires to go someplace where the competition is, I have to walk. Okay, because for a lot of folks, that is the competition. Okay, because if buses could have done it in the past, we would have done it with buses. It'd be there. We aren't stupid, are we? We would have figured out how to do that. Anyway.
Also, why leave it at 15 years old? 15-year-olds. That's also, I think, one of the tragedies that people who have the best of intentions are missing. It's not just 15 years old. It's the elderly. It's the disabled. It's people who shouldn't be behind a car because they're dangerous. I mean, all of that. And again, this would tie into thinking, look, let's think in terms of policy for society. This is exactly what we want to do, is we want to homogenize the risk of all motorists. And the way to do that is AVs, because otherwise you're still going to have people out there with different levels of risk. And we've seen during the pandemic what happens, that the riskiest now are out there as others have gotten off the road and they're speeding and getting into fatal crashes, driving over 100 miles an hour. And obviously that's not the kind of situation you want.
This morning in New Jersey, ice storm throughout New Jersey, the carnage out there this morning by people in their cars, driving them ridiculously. Any driverless vehicle operator would have been moving those people. Maybe they would have made them 3 minutes late for work, but they would have operated it in an operational capacity such there wouldn't have been all the carnage that there was out there on New Jersey roads this morning. I mean, come on, cut it out.
We'll be back with more, but this is a good time to remind you about our sponsor. I'm finally getting to say something, Alain. The Smart ETFs, Smart Transportation and Technology ETF, symbol MOTO. To get more info, head to motoetf.com. On the website, look for a white paper. It's called The Smart Transportation Revolution. It's under the Insights and News tab. Some great information there to help you make informed decisions about investing. You probably know that ETFs can be a good way to spread risk with investments, maybe focus on a particular category of stocks. The website again is motoetf.com. We're back with more of Smart Driving Cars and our guests, Cliff Winston from the Brookings Institution and Reason Foundation's Marc Scribner. Maybe we should ask each of you, since we've gone over what's wrong with this Washington Post piece, we'll ask each of you for your views on the state of autonomous mobility, where things are headed, maybe. Marc, you want to lead things off?
Yeah, well, I'm not privy to, the kind of the sensitive business information to provide real insight into where the technology is. But if we're looking on the sort of the public policy, which is what I focus on, there's a lot of work still to be done, particularly at the federal level when it comes to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration's federal motor vehicle safety standards. A lot of that has to do with standards that have yet to be developed and are needed to be incorporated in future regulations. But I remain cautiously optimistic, in part because we finally cleared ADB headlamps through NHTSA, so maybe that's the source of my optimism, cautious optimism. But I think we still have a lot of people working on these issues in key positions that are focused on what is needed and are realistic about when they're going to have the information they need to act. So from my perspective, I think we've got years before we kind of see the ubiquitous AVs we'd all like to see, but I think we haven't made any major mistakes that would, certainly I'm not alarmed by the progress that's been made at both the technological and the policy levels.
Cliff?
Yes, I'm more of a consumer of what Marc and Alain have, frankly, on an awful lot of what I do in terms of my thinking about the cars. What I would switch a bit to now is autonomous trucks, because I think that's a story that does seem to sort of go less noticed, but seems to have some positive direction, and also, again, potential benefits that I think people are maybe not focusing on. The obvious advantage with automation, both with trucks and ships, is help in dealing with things like the supply shortages and the breakdown in the supply chain. That could go a long way in helping things move along better and not have the vulnerability to driver shortages and whatever. But there's also the bigger picture thing, and so this really dovetails more into my research and a paper that I share with Marc that'll be part of a book. Is we did a very just rough calculation, or what are the potential benefits in terms of inventory logistics cost savings to shippers from autonomous trucks, making, I think, fairly modest assumptions on what the travel time and travel time reliability improvements would be. And they're huge. We're talking, good 30, 40 billion bucks in terms of reducing inventory and logistics costs. And, they're probably missing out on a number of other benefits. So, at a time where there's concerns about the economy more efficient, more productive, what have you, autonomous trucks are a very valuable tool. And I think the companies know this. I mean, that is, the shippers know this. And I think that the autonomous truck companies themselves are smart, and they're, dealing with these people and, moving along with what appear to be some pretty successful demonstrations, and are broadening where they want to go. I think what's going on in Michigan is a promising development. I'm sure we'll see more. So I think my growing sense on this is autonomous trucks will probably help lead the way for autonomous cars. And I think that, that they will operate more on the highways and not sort of get so much involved in the local travel. But that in and of itself could lead to considerable benefits and attract positive attention for autonomy in general. So that's what I'm hoping we start to see more of as time goes on.
Alan's talked at length about the benefits of autonomous technology in trucks, even if you don't pull the driver, maybe especially if you don't pull the driver, the benefits.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think that if there's any lacking or that's been in the goods movement sector has been the slowness by which at least I perceive, and it may be because I'm just clueless, that the long haul or medium long haul trucking entities to adopt automated advanced driver assistance systems for drivers. In other words, before you pull the driver out. And again, no analytical, just conceptual look at that. To me, I look at the job of driving a truck. I mean, I can't see myself driving a truck 10 hours a day to feed my family. I mean, I'd rather dig ditches, I think. I don't know. I mean, be in a coal mine or something. To me, it just, that might be very entertaining or something for the first couple of days, but to do that, to feed your family is, my goodness, the amount of concentration you need to be, even in open roads, to not die, not kill yourself, is just enormous. And to me, the shame of maybe it's a shame. I would like to see more of an emphasis by these companies to put just the advanced driver assistance stuff, the stuff that doesn't take the driver out of the cab, but helps him or her. And of course, the other piece of it to really, if one on a public policy side wanted to influence that, say, hey, I'm going to give them another hour service. Holy mackerel. Then you put that in all your things to see what the economic implications of that and productivity and plus the driver is there more relaxed, easier job. More people want to do it. Because of that, I don't know, Cliff, it needs some of your analytical work to go in there and really say, oh my goodness, this is low-hanging fruit.
Unions are going to have a lot to say about this. I think one of the big problems that automation faces is obviously unions who are, before you could even get the words out, are screaming about jobs and pay. So although there's no question about how increasingly difficult driving a truck has become to make a living. There was that I think it was a New York Times Magazine, had a whole section just going in almost gruesome detail about really what it's like to be out there and do this to make a living, that even though the drivers might say, hey, it'd be nice if these things were automated, then unions start saying, yeah, but we're going to start cutting jobs, and before you know it, you'll be out of a job. And then we're back into that debate as to, wait a minute, but can automation lead to other jobs that might be better? And of course, they expand the economy, and so you'll get employment there. But again, these are built-in rigidities in the American economy that are very difficult to overcome. But I think, again, the key of doing it is experiments. So I think the more we see the trucks out there performing successfully, efficiently, more companies using and saying, wait, this is a good thing, and drivers, think, okay, we can do something else. Maybe we'll lead a flotilla, there'll be one of us, and that kind of thing, a variety of things that can happen. And of course, new jobs develop you can't predict, because we're dealing with innovation. You're not going to know what happens. Then I think we'll make some progress, but it's not easy.
Yeah, and I would say on the point of unions. Now, one, it's important to note that long haul truck drivers, very few of them are represented by any union, but most of the unionized truck drivers are in last mile delivery, like UPS. But they see the writing on the wall. So even when they see these experiments taking place for long haul carriers, they realize that that's eventually coming to them. On the transit and labor side, it was interesting. If you watch the recent House Transportation Infrastructure Committee hearing on AVs and trucking and transit, the head of New York MTA's transit union pointedly said, we're never going to accept getting operators out of the buses or out of the trains, and he can point to, and the thing that makes this different for transit is that since the Urban Mass Transportation Act in 1964, which funded the takeover of bankrupt private transit companies, a provision in there called Section 13C basically prevents any kind of labor saving policy from any transit agency that's receiving federal funding, and this has to be certified by the U.S. Department of Labor. Not a lot of folks.
I think there's a huge amount of money you have to pay somebody to get rid of them. I think you can get rid of people, but you wind up paying a fortune to do it.
It goes well beyond any kind of provision you would see in a collective bargaining agreement. Right. It basically prevents any kind of adverse impact to the unionized workforce ever. So that is going to be a tremendous barrier to get this into mass transit vehicles. I mean, I know, folks who work at transit agencies and in municipalities are well aware of this provision, but, when we hear about some of these, the automation in the context of transit, this just, immediately 13C comes to mind. That is the barrier, and that is a public policy barrier that, regardless of how good the technology is, we're going to have to find a way through it.
True, but Mark, what about though the economics? In other words, if transit share continues to plummet, is there a point when the taxpayer-funded subsidies for the amount of ridership is so ridiculous that people say, look, just as a matter of economics, there's just not enough use of transit to even justify it, because AVs will eventually take all their trips. There'll be very few people who will use transit. Load factor, shares, so on and so forth will plummet, but still, obviously, the subsidies are going to come in. Is there really an impossibility theorem that there is no level of share that transit could have before people start saying it's time to pull the plug?
That's a great point. I think you can see a lot of these tiny transit agencies that you see across the United States, them going away. But for the legacy, the half a dozen legacy transit systems tend to have big heavy rail backbones. Right. They, I think, are going to persist. I think Manhattan has the density to justify a rapid transit system, and that is where you're just not going to be able to see the kinds of improvements and that's honestly what I think is going to happen. I think we're just not going to see the improvements in those niche markets.
Right, but why wouldn't they want to go automated too? I mean,
I think they will. It's just a question of can they get through
labor at that point. In other words, if New York City says, look, we have to be able to compete with these guys, we're going to have to go automated too. Then at least we'll start to get momentum where, okay, we're going to make adjustments in labor. You're going to slowly accept it. And then we'll see if any of them can even survive, right? I mean, that seems to me a plausible long run equilibrium.
I have a couple of questions, and maybe Mark, you're the guy to answer it. What's the definition of transit? Because, and the reason why I ask that, what we're trying to do in Trenton with respect to Trenton Moves is provide mobility to folks, you know, on streets, you know, between A and B. Is that transit, or is that, what is that? What do we call the provision? Some provider who out there has, you know, pay a fare or be a member, or who knows how you select who's allowed to get on, not get on, and all that stuff. But to go from A to B, what's that called? Is that transit?
I think, you know, in a loose,
I
loose
think it
definition
is.
of transit, I think you would include that. I
think
mean, the mass transit part, though, I mean, when we're thinking about these large conventional transit vehicles, and
Right.
especially
So,
what is
but-
eligible to receive grant funding from FTA and is regulated by the Federal Transit Administration, you know,
I mean,
that's part of it too. It's like eligibility for grants will in part dictate the restrictions that are placed on these emerging modes. So if they end up accepting money from government agencies that have strings attached, they need to be aware of that, because that could greatly restrict
as
their
naive
operations.
as I am, okay, or let's say whatever I'm trying to do in Trenton, whatever the heck that is, you know, I don't want us to apply for grants. Okay, we're gonna make money off of this. Okay, we might have differential pricing. Some people might pay market price. The other people will get a discount card for who knows how they get it. You know, we figure out a mechanism. Certainly don't want any federal money. The hell with that. I mean, costs you $2 for every buck you get. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if that's true or not. Sorry, Cliff, I didn't do the analysis. I just throw that sucker out there. But you know, don't want it. I mean, look, people want to go from A to B, and that A to B they can't walk it, and they're more than willing to pay for it. You know, I pay for these cars I have out here, and what the hell is the price of Brent yesterday? 105? Are you kidding me? You know, I mean, come on, and yet, you know, where's my elasticity on these things, Cliff? I mean, you don't even, right? We pay for it gladly. We get benefit out of it. And why not put something else out there to get benefit? Or, you know, we do the whole elevator analogy thing. My goodness, you know, Hamilton Jewelers up in the corner, Nassau Street, Witherspoon. Boy, I bet they would pay any mobility system that would take me from my home to walk in that door to go buy, you know, maybe a necklace for my wife. I mean, holy hell, they'd be fighting to, which is the way elevators work in buildings. If you want to charge rent on the 14th floor, you know, you've got to provide that. Don't you, Cliff?
Absolutely.
Otherwise, you don't collect the rent, do you?
Let me make one point.
I don't
now,
know.
because I want to make sure I get this in.
Yeah, okay, please.
My most important point, since I've now had the months of anger pent up about this, and that's the technology naysayers.
Yeah.
Right, who I consider my biggest enemies in this. The people who, you know, AVs are not going to work, and you know, economists are not, let's say, the most socially skilled people. These people are up there with economists. I will not mention names, but they belong with economists in terms of their social skills. All right. So this is the economics of technological change that I think, you know, should get out there. Okay. First of all, you know, predicting technological change is one of the most important things in the economics profession. You know, Bob Solow got a Nobel Prize and Paul Romer got a Nobel Prize. Now, they had different ideas. You know, Solow basically said, look, the technological change comes from so many different sources at so many different times that it really is close to impossible to predict where and when it's going to come. And you know, it's probably best that you treat it as exogenous. Okay, and that was Solow's growth theory. It's technology and innovation is what drives the economy, but you know, it's very hard to really come up with policies. And you know, Solow, a brilliant guy, when I've seen him even testify and people ask him, okay, well, what do you recommend, Professor Solow? It doesn't come off very strongly as to, well, what we really can do other than an investment tax credit. You got to say something, but that's about it. Now, Romer, pushed it and said, look, there's endogenous technological change. Ideas matter and knowledge is important. And we get this through collaboration. And so, yes, we can get innovation in technologies with communities where we share ideas and the like. And sure, I mean, you can get some examples of doing that. And then that motivates, economies of agglomeration, which is critical, again, for transportation to get people together. Fine, but even then, that's very difficult. But then let's look at autonomous vehicles. You've got really both things at work. It's really hard to see exactly where everything is coming from. It's all over the world. I mean, I don't understand how anybody can say, oh, we're never going to get these things, and they live in America. I mean, I don't know what's going on in Norway. I mean, I know that China is going to put out an AV road only. Doesn't that tell you something? I mean, this is crazy to sort of say that you can make predictions on a global phenomenon just by living in the US. All right, so we have that part of it. But then in terms of sources of endogeneity and collaboration, we see that too. So that's, again, a very positive development. Repeatedly, we see companies working together, different types of industries that are in there. So that's good. Now, what's the empirical evidence? All right, on this, is there any evidence that I've ever seen or that you've ever seen where an entire industry has made a commitment to a technology, made investments, and came up with nothing, zero return? Remember, I'm talking about an industry, an entire industry has failed. I don't know of one. I know of plenty of examples of firms within an industry that made a bet, an investment in a technology, and they failed and they were surpassed by other firms that had a better technology. And you guys could probably rattle off the people that iPad and iPhone replaced, and all the way down the list as to ones who do that. And I see that's exactly in the spirit of what I would expect with AVs. Yes, they're going to be failures. We expect that. That happens all the time. But again, we're going to see new things come along too. So if you look at the theory and any evidence of technological change in the economics literature, I am at a loss to understand the dogmatism, and that really is the word to describe it, the dogmatism of the anti-AV people that say we're just not going to have it. It just is completely at odds with what we know about the theory and evidence on technological change. And obviously, these people have either no knowledge or no interest in this kind of thing.
Go ahead, jump on. You want to add to it, or or maybe I'll add a little bit. But go ahead, Mark.
I don't really have much to add from Cliff, but Cliff is proving that economics need not be dismal on questions like this. So I very much appreciate the optimism. And I've tried to think. Would you put cold fusion in that category, Cliff, of an industry that went belly up? Although that was more, I don't know if you would. That's the closest I could think of.
I was
cold
thinking
and hot.
3D
I want to have
TVs,
both cold and hot fusion. Neither of them have made.
Although they're saying, I've heard it. Maybe
they're still the cold one did die though.
Yeah.
I don't know. To me, I guess, but I'm so laser focused. I'm so biased. I've consumed so much of the Kool-Aid. I can't see straight. But I look at this technology as to what it can do to move people really easily, and there's no reason why it has to be expensive. And in fact, I think you're going to get shared rides. And if you ask me about whether or not this increases congestion, it eliminates congestion. Because in fact, when do you have a probability that you're going to get shared rides? When there are a lot of people that want to go in the same direction at the same time. And guess where the congestion is? Where everybody wants to go in the same direction at the same time. Oh my goodness. And so now out here on Route 1, instead of having one person in each vehicle, you have three. Okay, why? Because, hey, it was convenient, the information. I think, to me, one of the reasons why we don't share rides, we don't have a convenient information system that even tells us about opportunities to share, those of us that drive our own personal cars. I don't know when my neighbors want to go someplace that they could have just as easily hopped in with me. How many of those opportunities are lost? Are we really all that independent and that's so separated that we, and all of a sudden, if it's, a little bit more like how people share elevators, and again, coming down to the damn elevator analogy, I mean, the way that system works in buildings, it is beautiful. Okay. And now maybe it's easier because it's just a shaft and it's just going up and down as opposed to, two-dimensional, who knows where. But my goodness, we don't have an elevator for each person. And when there's the high demand, we just squeeze in there a little bit more, even in COVID. Okay. So, I mean, and I think that this is what's going to happen. I don't know. Unfortunately, I can't get those things out of my head.
Alan, I think another thing is, normally that people focus on the origin and destination of the trip. But what AVs will then have you focus on the trip itself. That is, imagine now, to get shared rides, you may have AV opportunities where AVs are driving around a neighborhood and say, look, we're going to offer breakfast. And there's something you want to do in the morning, get to work, come on our AV, and we can sit and we'll serve you breakfast. Or you want to go somewhere and you want to see a show, en route, come with us. Who knows the kinds of things en route that AVs will be able to offer, and then simultaneously attract more people in such vehicles. And again, that'll be a way of reducing the individual use of vehicles. And again, this will evolve.
Yeah, no, to me, I mean, that's why I always thought Google was in this. Oh my goodness, if they have me in a vehicle, they have my attention. Now, of course, they put it in New York City cabs too, and this person is barking at you, and I do everything to try to turn the damn thing off, and beat on it, whatever. But but the Google folks are really bright. They're going to figure out, oh, I wanted to see that. Ooh, and all of a sudden, then they reach in my pocket and they take even more money. And I don't go to Washington, and I don't ask those folks for a penny.
To your point that you were making a minute ago, Cliff, when we turn to some of the headlines, GM and Cruise are now asking federal regulators for permission to build and deploy self-driving vehicles without steering wheels, without brake pedals. And that's one of the new developments. And as you say, would they be doing this if they didn't think there was a future in it? Bosch and Volkswagen have formed a partnership to develop self-driving technology suitable for mass production. They say they expect the first level 2 functions to arrive next year and bumping things up beyond that. Alan, any comment on those headlines?
Yeah, well, the comments are, that people have been trying to get NHTSA to be able to allow vehicles without steering wheels for a while. And so, come on, NHTSA, think about it and, make that happen. Mark, you've been following that.
Yeah, so this would be the first automated driving system related exemption for passenger vehicles granted, because right now Neuro has the only ADS related exemption. GM Cruise had originally filed a petition a couple of years ago for a vehicle like this built on the Chevy Bolt platform. They subsequently withdraw this, and now they have the Cruise Origin. But I think what gets missed a lot in the discussion of these federal motor vehicle safety standard exemptions is it's not just about getting these things on the road and having NHTSA sign off on that. It is about the information that these developers have to provide NHTSA to demonstrate that these vehicles will have an equivalent level of safety or better. That kind of information, showing NHTSA, giving them a look under the hood, so to speak, of the safety case of these vehicles, that will help NHTSA develop the longer term rulemaking projects to modernize these federal motor vehicle safety standards, so developers of the futures don't have to seek exemptions for their non-compliant AVs. So that, I think, is a critical point. At this stage, this exemption process, getting that information to regulators can pay dividends down the line, not just for this specific potentially exempt AV.
And Mark, I don't know if you can, comment on this also. We've argued on here for quite some time that this whole industry should have an exemption from antitrust to collaborate on safety. Okay, I think the air industry collaborates on safety. I think Boeing and Airbus collaborate on safety of airplanes. I believe so. I'm not deep enough policy guy to really understand that. But my goodness, this industry, if it collaborates on safety and competes on all the other stuff that really is going to make it or break it in the marketplace, it just helps everybody. It just helps everybody, and they shouldn't be competing. And if now being more open in the provision of the safety reasons why you don't need a steering wheel and so on and so forth in a car would be moving in that direction. Either of you have comments on that aspect?
Alan, it's kind of funny. Mark probably thinks the same thing. Look, in the end, NHTSA will force them to collaborate on safety. Well, because what happens? NHTSA doesn't come up with any safety regulation. They go to the industry for advice, right? The right. Airlines tell NHTSA, what it is.
FAA,
and that's what NHTSA does. It's the same thing will happen with AVs. Well, the AV industry will tell NHTSA, here are the things that are important for our vehicles, and NHTSA will probably sign off on it, don't you think?
I hope so, but where does antitrust fit in? Where's collusion fit in on this whole thing? Where does that?
Well, you don't accuse an agency of collusion. It's hard to bring an antitrust case against a government agency.
I think that the kind of thing NHTSA would be after, and what they would ultimately mandate, would be the kind of technical standards that are being developed right now, and that's where you do see collaboration among industries. People, sitting on those standard committees, working, because that's what, that is what NHTSA is tasked to do under the Vehicle Safety Act. It is minimum performance requirements. You can go above and beyond that, and that can take lots of different shapes. Ultimately, what's delivered to the consumers, but what they're interested in is minimum performance, safety and performance. So I think we're seeing that. I don't know if we need to, I don't think we need to really reinvent the wheel when it comes to NHTSA's authorities. I do think we would strengthen the incentive for companies to provide more information to NHTSA if we increased, at least for light duty vehicles, the annual exemption cap for, which is right now 2,500 vehicles for 2 years, potential 2-year renewal. So at max for a company, you're looking at 10,000. You can't scale with, say, urban transportation with that. But as the Congress has previously considered, significantly increasing that, that might provide more incentive for companies to share information and share it earlier with NHTSA. So that's something I think Congress should keep in mind as it considers pursuing AV legislation in the future.
Talk about lawmakers. Alan, one more little headline to bring up here. State lawmakers in Utah have approved a bill that says a driver who activates a self-driving feature while under the influence can still be cited for DUI because someone still has to be in charge of the vehicle. I think you might argue the same thing.
Well, I mean, isn't that obvious? I mean, it's absolutely obvious. I mean, in anything that's out there right now, just because you engage this thing doesn't mean you can hop in the back seat, whatever. I mean, you're the one that's responsible there. Elon doesn't take responsibility as soon as you engage whatever he calls whatever he has. He still says, hey, read the fine print.
And the Utah amendment, yeah, I mean, it basically, no shocker, as Alain says, it's if you have a level 3 ADS in a vehicle and you have to be a fallback ready user, well, if you're supposed to be waiting to potentially take over, you shouldn't be intoxicated. Same thing if you're a remote operator. But that, reading this bill made me think, are we going to see, like we have the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration's role in drug and alcohol testing today? Are we going to see that extended to remote drivers in the future? Because if I am I'm sitting in Palo Alto as a remote driver operating a vehicle in Arizona, it's a bit more difficult for the Arizona authorities to enforce their state drug driving laws. So potentially that's something in the future. Are we going to see a stronger federal role if AVs do have those kind of remote fallback?
Mark, I'll say don't hold your breath on that one, okay? And the reason why I don't look, remote driving of these things is, to me, I mean, if you want something that ain't gonna happen, to me, that's the one. Do you realize what our reaction time is when we drive a vehicle? And if we're even transmitting from California to Arizona, the delays and the perception that we have, you're going to give this to somebody in a hollowed out mountain. I mean, cut it out. I can't drive in Manhattan. I mean, I might go in there again, maybe once in my life. I don't think I'm going to go in there twice. I just can't do it anymore. Driving, I mean, it is a real time function. Okay. And when things start to unravel, they unravel quickly. And that's why this whole level 3 stuff is,
I mean, video gamers talk about latency. Think about, I guess that's the point he's making.
I mean, I don't know.
I was convinced, a decade ago by the late Cliff Nass's simulator at Stanford that we're not going to see that. So,
Cliff, hey, that brings what a wonderful guy, Princeton grad, whatever, loved him. What a loss, anyway. Thank you for reminding us.
Alan has actually given a nice proof of the fundamental problem with again, to swing back to David's article about the criticisms of the quote 94.6% concerns about human error, right? So people trying to sort of downplay the importance of AVs, saying, well, human beings don't really count for that much of the cause of accidents, right? And I think he mentioned that in the piece, saying that's overstated. And to tie in my final point, what that misses, and that Alan effectively points out, is selectivity. That is, virtually any time there's an accident, the key thing is the driver was there. Like if Alan were driving in New York and there were a storm and that washed out the road and the police officer came to see Alan's crash, he would say, oh, that's an infrastructure problem. The water washed out the road. That wasn't driver error, right? But Alan made the choice to be there. Or in this case, he made the choice not to be there. That is selectivity bias. Virtually every accident can be interpreted that people have made the choice to be on that road, to drive in those conditions, to be out there at that time, all of that. And none of the people who make judgments about the causes of accident ever account for that fundamental choice initially, your decision to be out there at that time in that place. And again, people will say these things but there's just basic principles are just not being used. And it's very misleading. And apparently, people have bought up at this, and it's just wrong. Selectivity bias is critical and probably would make it look like that almost all of accidents are somehow related to human error. It's very hard not to.
Yeah, I mean, the number of times a meteorite comes out of the sky and hits you, is rare. Yes, a bridge did collapse in Pittsburgh a couple of, week or so ago, right when the infrastructure bill money or something came out just in time. I don't know. I won't say what I said. Never, they didn't fake it. But anyway, stage it. But, some of those things do happen, but they are really rare. Okay. The others are, people were out there this morning in the ice storm in New Jersey driving like, hey, come on. And guess what? You're misbehaving when you do that. Okay. You're the one that's by being out there. That's how you get to the 94. The human is just involved in it's a human problem.
Well, we want to thank the humans who are with us here today.
Maybe we are. Are we?
Cliff and Mark, really terrific. Thank you so much for a really great discussion.
Someday we want to be on with a policymaker. That's what we would love. We would love somebody who really could benefit from a discussion with AVs, is in a position to have some influence on policy to chat with us, or at least
I think we have some invitations out there, but we'll renew them.
Yeah, I mean, but Cliff, that really is. I mean, you guys are down there in Washington, and if in fact we could, it would be nice. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe they need to invite us to hearings or something. I don't know. I guess you get it done a little bit in hearings. I know here in New Jersey we have several who are just what we're doing here in Jersey is, I guess we're just waiting to see what we need when we get to a point where we need something. We are still very much at the very beginning of this. As Cliff mentioned, there are many different directions we still have the opportunity to go. And of course, we desperately, and the longest thing that it takes in these things, certainly, if I could say my experience in New Jersey is proven to be able to get the welcoming that you need, so that you can even sit down and talk with people and get them even thinking about the concept of deployment, of actually being out there every day, moving people. And providing, delivering that value or goods, either one. It's the same thing. It's easy to do a test. Well, it's not that easy.
You don't have that going on down here. This is not going on at the federal government. No, I think your thing in New Jersey is important.
We're
it's
trying
not going on down here.
We're trying to do it here, and I think we have a reasonable chance. And I just I was down, as I already mentioned, at Trenton High School today, just talking to teachers and talking to administrators as to how to get the kids involved in this leading edge thing that we're trying to do in Trenton. And I mean, to see the brightness in their face as to, hey, this is an opportunity not just to do mobility, but to improve education in a school system. As the school board is a state appointed school board. And why is it a state appointed school board? Well, you know the reason why. And I mean, come on, and all this to package all this together and provide mobility for them, their parents, their grandparents, and so on. Oh my goodness. I mean, these I don't know. There's got to be some economic value in all that, Cliff. I think it just has to be. I mean, there just has to be.
And that leads us, Alain, to the Smart Driving Car Summit coming up in May, that's what this is going to be about.
Yeah, that's exactly what it's going to be about. And, the key piece that we're talking to them about is having, a festival at the high school with the kids that will then bring their parents and their grandparents and, have a chance. Nobody in New Jersey knows what this stuff is. Nobody in New Jersey knows what this stuff is.
And we're
We've had
hoping to
like
have the
3
companies.
vehicles. We've had 3 vehicles here ever. It's not like, you know, California or Arizona. Even there, it's not. I mean, nobody knows.
And we're hoping to have the companies
You saw the
involved with this too.
commercial in the
Hands-on.
Super Bowl with Meadow Soprano on
Yes.
electric vehicles. You
Yeah,
know what I'm talking about? That's what we
Yes.
need for AVs.
we-
Having Meadow, you know, in an AV talking to her brother in the car.
yeah. I mean, I think.
Well,
you know,
you'd have an automated vehicle dumping a body in the woods, but that's
Yeah,
another
exactly.
yeah, but you know, on that, I mean, you know, we're looking at 2 places to do this festival. Okay, one is the high school, which is kind of on a Saturday, whatever, because what they have fields in place, we can do it. The other, I have the audacity to suggest, is Donley Homes, public housing complex. Okay, whatever went in your brain as a public housing complex, that's what this is. And we're seriously considering doing the festival there because that's our customers. Those are the first people that could, at least we think, that could really use this. They're the kids, they're the parents, they're the grandparents that live there. And my good, I mean, I can't wait to see Waymo, you know, bring their, if they wouldn't dare bring their Chandler vehicles to a public housing complex.
But that's where the mobility is needed, and that's the whole thing.
I don't know. That's what we think here in Jersey, and that's where we'd like to start it. And I think that's where we. So I don't know. I don't know where we're gonna. We're still working on where, at least the festival piece of this thing. And the key to the festival piece is not only for the people to see what might be possible in the technology or what this part of might be all about. Is for the people who are working on the technology to actually meet the people who might actually be their customers. I don't think it's you know, whatever-year-old with champagne going down the Jersey Turnpike. You know, maybe, sure, you know, they already have their limousine. They already have their driver. Actually, it would be, they would put their nose up at something like this. Whereas these folks, oh my goodness, the expanded opportunity that it brings to them easily. I don't know. We're gonna see what we can do here. Both of you guys, I hope, you know, I have you on a program, so you're coming, whether you like it or not. Anyway,
well, it is all about improving lives, as you.
Yeah, no, I think so. I don't know. We'll see what the hell we can do. I don't know.
On that note, we want to thank our sponsor, the Smart ETFs, Smart Transportation and Technology ETF. The ticker symbol for the ETF is MOTO, and more info is available at motoetf.com. Technical support is provided by CARTS, the Corporation for Automated Road Transportation Safety, a 501c3 corporation. You can find us at smartdrivingcar.com, also on Anchor FM, Spotify, TuneIn, Apple, Google, Spreaker, wherever you turn to for podcasts. Your smart speaker can play us too. You can find my tech reports at textination.com. I'm Fred Fishkin along with Alain Kornhauser. Thank you for listening or watching. Please stay safe.